Hello, everyone. It is the UFC analysis desk once again, and we got all the experts here. You know, we have the bear, gorilla, and fighter experts here. We got Crisis Comics. We got Clyde the weeaboo. We got Seth the programmer. We're back at it again. You guys really like the gorilla versus 100 men video, and on my streams, by the way, you guys should check those out sometime. You guys were asking a lot of questions like, what about a bear versus 100 men, or this creature versus 100 men? What is the limit? Because in the gorilla video, we really established it's not a fair comparison. Maybe like 10 men at most. Even then, it's sort of... I think this video might establish that 5. It might be a little crazy. And we'll be going over some stories, and I'll let them take the floor most of the time in this video. In the last video, I kind of established too many things at the beginning, so I'll kind of let them flow their stories in a bit better this time. That being said, though, everything we're going to say, for the most part, or at least like a lot of the cool stuff, if you guys want to, like an actual just constructed Set the Programmer video on it, you can watch Gorilla versus Grizzly Bear. It's on my channel. But this will go over like more like niche man versus, you know, creature stories and stuff like that. I guess in my perspective, I still believe that 100 men would defeat the Grizzly Bear. I'm not going to go too into detail right away, but for me, Grizzly Bears, they don't like to fight incredibly long. They can fight a lot longer than a gorilla, though. Like, they can have like lethal death battles where they're like bleeding and drowning each other for about 20 minutes or so, and they can even go possibly even longer if they have to. So they're a bit more kill ready than a gorilla. They also are far more lethal. They could realistically kill a guy in one swipe if he gets unlucky, you know, whereas a gorilla might have to pick him up and tear him in half. A grizzly bear could just one swipe and he could be done for. Similar bite force and far more lethal tendencies, far more kill hungry, and overall just bigger killing machine, far more durable. A human can't really just like bite a grizzly bear. Like, even with a gorilla, like if 10 guys are on it like chomping it like zombies, you know, they could really do that. Grizzly bear, not really so much. They can kind of tank bites that are 5 times more powerful than a human all the time. And we don't even have like sharp teeth or anything like they do, really. These grizzly bears are really hard to take, but they do have specific weaknesses and fears, and they clearly get fatigue and don't like certain things, and they don't have infinite stamina. But that being said, I'll let these guys take the floor and give some of their stories and their perceptions on it. This is a little bit more complicated than the gorilla one. The gorilla one's like, yeah, whatever, but this one will take a lot more, I guess, bro talk to kind of digest, because we don't have like one-to-one examples per se all the time. So anyway, you guys go ahead.
Alright, I'll go first then. So, I believe that the grizzly bear in particular, to specify, is basically what everybody thinks the gorilla is when it comes to this matchup, and Bear Summer is going to come and avenge his bro gorilla in this video. So basically, when it comes to men versus like black bears and other breeds, it's pretty relative to some degree. Of course, they're very dangerous, but there's a lot of videos and stories of men being able to fight them off. But when it comes to a grizzly bear, you know, we're talking about a being which just by itself has actual defensive stats that just give it such an inherent advantage against humans that it's pretty how much a benefit they have. Like, just the amount of hair they have on their bodies and how thick it is. And as Seth said, the fact that we can't even bite hard enough to make up like a fifth of their bite force. Like, roughly, I think we have about 200 PSI. They have about 1,000 on average. That's crazy, and they bite each other casually when they fight each other all the time without damaging one another because of how dense not only their muscles are, their skin, their fur.
Literally bouncing musket fire off of it sometimes.
Yeah, true. They have a natural ability to wrestle, which I'm sure you guys have seen a lot in the notorious like Habib video where he was very young and he's wrestling with a bear. Of course, that's a joke example, but they actually do have a bit of a natural tendency to know how to apply technique when they fight one another, and of course it's no like UFC caliber technique, but it's still pretty cool that they're that versed when it comes to fighting. There are killing machines that can in some degrees chase you down faster than a horse and carriage back in the day. They can chase you up trees. They're faster than you when it comes to running. No human will outrun it. There's videos of them chasing horses for hundreds of meters and just eventually giving up, but still they think they can actually chase it down, which is wild. They can swim better than you too, so if you try running and climbing up a tree, you're cooked. If you try running in general, you're cooked. If you try swimming away, you're cooked. Technically, if they really wanted to, and this would involve some controlling aspect or a sentient mind, if a bear, grizzly bear specifically, decided to like just stand there and line up a punch or a swipe, it could literally snap your head off your shoulders with the amount of force it has behind its arms, which is wild. The movie Prey thinks that they're big enough to fight a predator, and I know that's not really relevant to this real-life example, but that's like how the writers of that movie thought it would match up, which is kind of cool and also relatively realistic too, to real world with how big they are and how dangerous they are. Native Americans used to warn European settlers about them too. They pretty much told them, don't even bother trying to kill these things or fighting them because they will maul you, and this is at a time period where guns weren't anywhere near as advanced as they are these days, so it's a little bit different to the modern day, but in general, they would have like these one-shot like black powder rifles and they'd have to reload them and shoot against the bears, and the bears would just, a lot of the time, tank the bullets and keep coming, which is scary as to hear. I'm pretty sure like if you were a European that was first in the USA around like the 1700s and some Native Americans told you as a warning not to, I mean, I would listen to that. Again, they'll try and fight horses. They can tank bullets, as I said before. In most cases, they recommend that if you ever go out hunting, like let's say you're going out hunting for deer or whatever, and you have to be worried about grizzly bears in the area, that a recommended defense weapon is usually something big like a 44 or a 357 Magnum. A lot of the time in the modern day, men will carry like larger caliber rifles to take them out because they genuinely just won't stop and they're that dangerous where you need something that big. Like if you took a Glock or a 9mm out there's a high chance that if you got rushed by a grizzly, you would probably put like 5 to 7 rounds into it and it would still keep coming. There's videos that even Seth and I spoke about a few days ago in relevance to the creation of this video, where there is a video of a guy that shoots a grizzly bear with a shotgun right at its face and it doesn't even stop the thing.
Yeah, it just sort of like fell over, like, oh, and then it got back up.
Then it got back up and kept coming, and I'm sure there's countless stories like this if you were to research about how many people say, like, you know, they were out hunting deer one time and then they tried getting one to go away, but it just didn't stop, and that's just like countless stories of that. I would say when it comes to the way that they generally match up, though, with this similar example of the, 100 men versus a grizzly, well, it is definitely a lot different because the grizzly bear itself is so much larger than the gorilla. It's not a relative size thing. All the things I just listed there are so much more impressive than everything that the gorilla can actually do. We're talking about something which has a defense to basically never get injured by a human. I don't think, generally speaking, even the largest, most lethal human, like let's just say, for example, we'll take Tyson Fury, we'll take Francis Ngannou, we'll take John Jones, just ask them to do whatever they can to a bear that doesn't fight back like a grizzly bear, and I don't think they have anything in their arsenal except for stuff like, eye pokes, eye gouging, trying to go for vitals, and it's so much harder with the bear because of the fur, because of the density of the skin, the actual size of it itself. This is genuinely the difference between heavyweight in the UFC versus, say, 155 with the gorilla versus bear example and how that applies to humans. It is such a difference in power and size that it's far more one-sided, but I feel like if it was all 100 men attacking at the same time, a lot of the time animals do cower in front of numbers and loud noises, so if these men all yelled and screamed at it while jumping on it at the same time, I absolutely guarantee that the win con for the humans is that they must take the eyes out, they must put hands down the throat while the others are attacking, ripping ears off, like really nasty stuff to take down the bear, because it is just so big and dangerous that you can't fight this thing fair at all whatsoever. There's no fairness to this fight. But yeah, that's what I would say for the most part when it comes to 100 men versus the grizzly bear, because it is a far, far different debate than the gorilla example. But I'll let Crisis talk now because I'm curious to hear what he has to say.
I think I would probably extrapolate on a point I made in the prior video, which was comparing the nature of humans hunting saber-toothed tigers and then comparing those to, let's say, a leopard and then to a gorilla. I think if we actually look at specific human encounters with grizzly bears specifically in most of these cases, the fact is, and while I think there is some nuances, obviously I think a grizzly bear pound for pound is way deadlier than a gorilla, and they definitely are built for actual combat, and they're also hyper-territorial, which leads into their showcases of just being far more aggressive. A gorilla is not fighting another gorilla for 20 minutes, it's just not happening. Whereas grizzly bears fight each other for that long, and they are infamously concerned with the health of their cub. They kind of almost have an existential, response to a threat being approached upon, not only themselves, but also the potential loss of life for their families. And so I think that definitely presents some unique threats to the hypothetical 100 people. But we have examples similar to humans versus gorillas, where human beings in 1v1 encounters have managed to survive encounters with grizzly bears. There's an instance where, as this man was being mauled, he was close enough to the grizzly bear's mouth that he himself was then able to bite out the bear's tongue and survive. And the bear ran off, obviously. And then there's a separate encounter where a hiker in Montana, as he was also getting bitten, shoved his entire arm down the bear's throat, and then the bear just retreated. And so you have to think, under these conditions, when a bear has total superiority and has no real reason to run away, right? You know, think of a UFC fighter. If he was just dominating somebody and then they got poked in the eye, are they just going to run away? Be like, oh, it's just not worth it,
right.
No, they'd get poked in the eye and then they'd, reposition, just keep dominating the guy. That's not enough to turn the fight. But instinctually, for whatever reason, when it comes to these bears versus men, if the man is able to inconvenience this bear in a couple of key ways, they just hightail it out of there. So you have to think, with 100 guys all jumping it at once, I think it would be pretty silly to say they're not going to replicate something of that caliber. And then when you look at the fact of the matter as well, once we try to integrate maybe tools into the equation, a lot of the times, even using knives, there are instances where bears are kind of like similarly made uncomfortable, or they just get scared and run off. And while back in the day, muskets really didn't pose much of a threat, there were a cultural institution among Native Americans similar to how humans hunted saber-toothed tigers to extinction. While the Native Americans respected the bear and deified its power, they also saw hunting it in groups, reportedly as little as 10 people, would, as a rite of passage, hunt and kill these bears that were basically a movie monster compared to the settlers that then came into the Americas. So it's really not unheard of for groups of people, even with relatively primitive weaponry, to take out a bear not dissimilar to a saber-toothed tiger, which even modern-day tigers, it's been reported that Bengal tigers in certain areas hunt and kill large Russian bears when they cross paths. So it's really not a unfair analogy. And so really, I think you take 100 people, modern-day people, with the internet, with these stories, and especially if you give them even basic weaponry, I think 100 of them, that's 10 times as many Native Americans that it would take to kill a bear. I think they would get the job done. And to give a frame of reference here, because while tanking muskets, that certainly is very impressive. If you gave like SEAL Team 6, for example, or a few guys with assault rifles, not a single guy isn't losing their life in this encounter with the bear. It's just not happening. So I think if you give 100 guys equal grounds as, 10 Native Americans, and if you gave a much smaller number of men the means of, say, the modern-day military, I don't think they're losing a single person, to be honest. I think they're losing a lot more people in the 100-man scenario with, maybe spears or knives. I think they're losing more people in that encounter than they are with, say, a gorilla, because of the gap in stamina, the gap in size, some of these other points that the other two have expressed already. But the fact of the matter is, we have a historical precedent for humans once again being able to dominate their environments and take out these super predators through raw numbers and technique. And then the fact is, these bears have weak points that even when single men are being basically within inches of losing their lives, are able to capitalize on these weak points. I think at worst, 1 out of the 100 men are going to stumble upon these same weaknesses, either their tongue or maybe their eyes or any of these places. They're sticking an arm down their throat or even a spear, and the bear is just going to fold. It just seems to be the case that they don't even win 100 times out of 100 in 1v1, so I think the odds are just going to become exponentially within the human's favor.
Yeah, so bears do have weaknesses. If they're grabbing onto one guy and then other people are like caving its face in, it's going to take serious damage. Not all of its face is made out of like this super big, reinforced skull. It does have weak points in the skull and appendages. Its nose can be kind of snapped up a bit. The inside of its mouth is weak. Its ears are weak. I was thinking of some other things that, maybe I shouldn't say it out loud, but, you ever seen like Kakashi 1,000 Years of Death, bro? Like, I'm thinking someone might be able to go crazy on something like that, and that bear is going to be freaking out, bro. Like, it has no durability there. They have a lot of things to work with. The bear is also instinctually inclined to sort of start giving up and turning tail. So I do think 100 men versus the bear will turn out in their favor. They'll find something out, and then it's only a matter of time whether it loses its tongue or kind of gets incapacitated or stops trying to fight and just trying to defend itself, where it starts just getting Resident Evil 5'd. It'll be a lot harder, of course. Like, For instance, with the gorilla versus the people, you know, you could argue like a bunch of people grabbing onto the gorilla could probably like kind of push it around somewhat. Like it'd be very difficult. But the bear, that's a lot harder. These things can get up to like 1,000 pounds. They're absolute units. Like it's going to be running through people like a car sometimes, but not all the time. It's just, it would take some precision, and people from all these stories, every single story we really have for the most part of these encounters, people do actually survive and do some stuff to it. It's not likely. It's just, it is possible. And so you have people informed on it, they could probably do something. Same thing might happen with the one at a time thing. We can kind of move into that. One at a time is a bit more complicated. Now, bears do have a lot of stamina compared to a gorilla. Some people argue a gorilla only has like 2 or 3 minutes of stamina in quick bursts, whereas a grizzly can lethally fight to the death for like 20 minutes, or if not, just way longer, because they have to be able to fight and kill for long periods of time. So their stamina bar is going to be a lot bigger, but it's not infinite either. And so it sort of depends on the residual damage it takes bit by bit. So like, I guess this is something I'm kind of curious what you guys think. So one at a time, let's say someone does, you know, bite off the bear's tongue or pokes an eye out while he's getting killed or something like that. I don't know. Is he going to go and finish the bear off? Can you kill the bear by biting off its tongue or something like that? What do you guys think about that in general? Because just scaring the bear off in a one-on-one is not enough, because you have to go chase it down and kill it. You still have to win. You know what I mean? So it's like, what's the win con for the gaunting, I guess? That's the question.
There's a high chance, actually, there's a pretty common method people will do when they're getting tortured where they will bite their own tongue off, and that can lead to bleeding to death pretty badly, or it's going to freak the bear out big time. A lot of these encounters too, so there are like some complications. Of course, a lot of the encounters where the humans survive, they do have like a knife or something to add to that to scare the bear off, but there's too many examples where the humans are able to do stuff like hand down the throat, fingers in the eye, and then eventually they f*** off. Now, in this bear versus 100 men 1 by 1, if the tongue gets removed or an eye gets removed, I do think it would get to a stage where it takes so much damage and becomes so stamina sort of drawn that it cowers and eventually will be finished off. And I think after about 10, 20 maybe, let's say we give the most optimal outcome where the bear fights smarter than usual, I do believe about 10, 20, 30 in, the bear does die in the example you just said, Seth. I think that would be a fair assessment to make, given all the evidence of people surviving and how that UFC fighters, they get poked in the eye, and a lot of the time, like, they will continue, but we're talking about losing an eye here, not just a poke in the eye, we're talking losing an eye, losing a tongue. You've got your mouth filling up with blood from the tongue being removed. Like, the animal would freak out. And of course, it will fight back in retaliation, but it's a numbers game again. I do think the initial debate premise when it came to this, especially with the gorilla example, 100 men is so much more than I think people really recognize. And once more, 10, 20, 30 in, the bear is likely going to die after that. That's my genuine final take on that.
Yeah, it could also die from shock as well. That's something that people need to consider, is that animals can die from shock. So losing a tongue, it can like get severe blood loss. They'll start getting kind of faint. Starts losing eyeballs. I don't know, starts getting 1,000-year of death or something like that. These animals can die of shock as well, and they're not, I guess they're not like Kryptonians where it's like impossible to make any wiggle room ever. It's just very, very difficult. So if it does become incapacitated, it is possible for it to be killed, you know, and that's something else to consider.
They also, too, this is a similar example to the gorillas you pointed out in the last video. You notice a lot of bear fighting videos with specifically grizzlies, they're always panting heavily and drooling and working themselves up. So, like, in terms of stamina, this thing is not going to pace itself well. The gorillas, as an example, they can hype themselves up so much that they literally just pass out from a heart attack and die. So, again, in terms of stamina, the bear is at a massive disadvantage long term. So, I would just say my points prior would conclude my position on the matter.
Yeah, I think one at a time, it's just going to be death by 1,000 cuts at worst, or maybe closer to 100 cuts. Maybe these stories are kind of extraordinary. Obviously, they are the standout examples. That's why they're recorded, right? And that's why...
Depends on the mass of the bear, too. It can be 300 or 1,000 pounds. You know, that also will change a lot of things.
Right. There's definitely deviations in the potential outcome. But you just have to think, right, just sort of in your gut, especially after we did a lot of the work here in the gorilla video, the 100 men versus a gorilla. There is just a precedent for humans being able to close this gap through raw numbers. even with rudimentary weapons. That's kind of what I keep going back to. And so you have to think in a lot of these cases, these guys who are near death, they're not even there to fight the bear. They just get surprised and jumped. And either through sort of rudimentary preparation, like say, having heard from your grandma that you can put an arm down a predator's throat and it will run away. In cases like that, they aren't even there to just hunt and kill the bear. But, you know, I don't want to repeat too much from the gorilla video, but it is pretty similar, right? If a bear saw a grizzly bear, honestly, no matter how big, seeing 100 angry people, it's going to run away one after the other. It's going to accumulate too much damage, either through maybe these unorthodox means of targeting its weak points.
Even brain trauma.
Right, or brain trauma, or just accumulative damage. It's definitely going to tear through many, many people, but eventually it's just going to get tired. I don't know if maybe people overestimate these predators or if they still just have this crazy amount of aura from back in the day where they honestly were just deified by the people, you know, living beside them. But 100 people, that's pretty crazy. That's a pretty insane gap to close, no matter how strong the predator. I think that's kind of where I would end the conversation.
There's also a major mental difference between the two situations here. So if the bear is the most optimal version, we're going to go with like the heaviest and the most intent to kill version of the grizzly bear versus the 100 men that have just been briefed in a room of, hey, you're going to go kill this grizzly bear.
Some Navy SEALs or something, like they have to go in.
When you tell these 100 men, your goal is to kill it by any means possible, there's a high chance you're going to die. What the humans can do in terms of an improv situation is going to be so much more optimal and so much more to the point of getting it done that they're just mentally at an advantage too. You know, we get about 20 men in. I mean, the others are going to find so many different ways to win that encounter. As Crisis said too, it is true, like, these bears are absolute mammoths of creatures in terms of strength and power and aura. There's a reason that they are remembered like that from history, but a lot of the times too, these stories are conveyed because the men did survive in these really wacky encounters. So, again, brief the humans, tell them exactly what they're doing, let them know that some of them are going to die, and they go in there with that intent to kill, they will find a way to win. It's so much more advantageous for the humans than it is for the grizzly bear, and yeah, I'd say that's a major factor to consider, is that there is, again, a reason why we are such a problem to deal with when it comes to a lot of animals, especially in groups. And if you give these men, for another hypothetical, as Christ has said, you just give them like something basic like a kitchen knife to add to the arsenal, and it's over. Like, they would find a way to win very easily.
Well, that being said, that's all there needs to be said for this video. You also can reference that gorilla video. A few things in that video apply to this one. You know, general animal fear, general stamina levels, general fatigue. Those things need to be considered even if it is a monster. This isn't Dragon Ball Z where they can blitz through 100 people and then they all just get KO'd like they're an anime character. So that being said, though, hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to check out Crisis and Clyde, or check out the gorilla versus bear video, or check out all of them.
Yeah, go watch that video. That video is fire. Go watch that video.
Take care, everyone. Peace.